Hello everyone and welcome to this week's, as usual, Thursday edition of Insights with Aymii, coming to you live from downtown Denver. And always, if you hear any noise outside, I'm right in the heart of it all, so you never know what's going to happen. I'm going to just take a moment to share this on my personal page as we get started here. And I'm so excited about today's topic because it's one that I find fascinating and counterintuitive too. So that's what's so cool about it. Hi Jenny, it's great to see you. Okay, welcome back. I know Jenny's been traveling for quite a few days, so I'm sure it feels good to be back on your home turf. I'm just getting this shared on my page, and we will jump right in. All right, there we go. Okay, now we are rocking and rolling. So one thing I want to just mention before I get right into the topic is that I've decided that each month I'm going to kind of have a theme that I'm working around for all of the different Facebook Live videos. So last month I focused on knowing your strengths and leveraging them and what you can do with them and why at times you may have to manage your strengths. Today's topic is going to bridge the gap between that area and what April's topics will be is rewards and motivation. Knowing your strengths is important because and the type of work you're called towards, because that will also tie in to knowing what sort of motivation and incentives and such will work best in particular situations for you. So while I'm talking about today's subject, I would suggest that you keep in mind the type of work you do and how your strengths play into that and why you love what you do and what inspires you. So today is kind of a transition, and then going forward for the rest of April, it's going to be all about rewards and motivation. So you would think when we're operating within our strengths, it would be reward enough. But most people believe, a little extra never hurts, a little bonus. And hello to Greg and Mark. Great to see everybody joining today. And I hope that you all don't need extra rewards and incentives just to watch this. But hey, I'm not above a little bribery. So at any rate, today's topic is there's some very counterintuitive psychology behind how and when and why to reward different behaviors. And I'm going to be mostly talking about it in the context of work and jobs, but it's very easy to see the parallels in if you have a child trying to teach them good behavior, or even if you have an organization or a friend, or maybe even yourself, who, if you're trying to do something, for example, like achieve a goal, whether it's weight loss or athletic goal or a career goal. So you can use these same concepts as motivators and ways to get more mastery at what you're doing, even if it's outside of work and projects and such. But that's the context I tend to talk in, because it is where my focus professionally is more often. So I'm going to talk about, and hi Stephanie, great to see you too. I'm going to talk a little bit about two different types of activities and two different types of motivators. So I'm going to throw a few technical terms at you first, and then we'll kind of back it up and talk it in a little bit more practical examples. Intrinsic and extrinsic. Chances are you've heard these words before. Intrinsic means coming from within, and things that speak to you and you're called towards and you're excited to do just by themselves. Ordering a pizza has some very intrinsic motivation for me. I get super excited for pizza, and nobody has to reward and incentivize me to have pizza for dinner. So that's probably not the best example, but it's intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic, typically we think of things that we don't really want to do, and there needs to be some kind of a push or a shove or incentive to get us to do them. These next two words I think are less commonly used in terms of the type of activities you might be doing: heuristic and algorithmic. Heuristic is any type of an activity that requires creativity, so problem solving, art, music, things that you're actually kind of creating, even coding, even developing applications. There's no repetitive set of steps that you have to do every time to achieve the goal. They think the same goal can be achieved differently by two different people in two different ways. But you look at an algorithmic job, and it's pretty much exactly what the word sounds like. It's something, there's an algorithm, and you do the same set of steps over and over. And most likely in this day and age, we've got automation, whether it's computers or robotics or what have you, that handle a lot of the algorithmic work that we do. I'm going to speak to a very specific example later that some friends of mine have very recently experienced that is extremely algorithmic, and I can tell you how much they did not enjoy doing that algorithmic task. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that and the type of motivation there. So those are some of the words that I might throw out there as I talk about motivation types. As we speak of incentives, rewards, bonuses, etc., I want to start out by saying there are basic needs that need to be met before these mechanisms will work on top of that. So things like what I would call hygiene factors in terms of your life and your work. Do you have decent pay? Can you keep the lights on? For those of you who are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, the safety and security and those types of fundamental needs need to be met before any of these additional pieces are effective. So job security, I'm going to say working conditions, but it certainly could be living conditions. And the absence of these elements will create dissatisfaction and angst and such and stress. However, the presence of them doesn't necessarily lead to fulfillment and joy and a greater purpose. So just know that anything I'm talking about today assumes that you have these basic hygiene factors, as I'll call them, met in your situation. So then layered on top of that is motivators. Enjoying the activity can be a motivator. Feeling genuine achievement, personal growth. So these are all sort of what I mentioned, the internal, the intrinsic motivators that boost satisfaction and performance and enjoyment. So keep in mind, hygiene, basic needs are met, and now we're going to be delving deeper into what motivators work in what conditions. The strongest driver, and I'm sure this comes as a surprise to no one here, is the intrinsic motivation type of driver. This leads, and some of you may have read the book Flow or heard that term, these having a preponderance of these intrinsic internal motivation pieces in working together is really what leads people to want to do things essentially without any additional rewards. I love the example of Wikipedia. That, you know, you would think you had a company, Microsoft, who created this incredible encyclopedia. Encarta was what it was called back in the day. I can't even tell you the last time they released it, probably in the late 90s. And they put in all kinds of rewards, and they had smart people working on this, and it was a beautiful electronic encyclopedia that ultimately failed because Wikipedia came along, which paid essentially no one to do it. It kind of was at least messy looking. You couldn't 100% rely on the accuracy of the information, but people who were contributing to it, and as you probably know, it's an open source, so essentially anyone can contribute to it. People who were contributing to it felt part of a higher purpose and felt they were rewarded by being part of this and contributing to the world and creating something. So this Encarta killer, Wikipedia, almost came out of nowhere, and people jumped on board because they genuinely enjoyed being part of that movement, if you will. So that's just an example of the power of intrinsic motivation and, you know, killing a huge sophisticated product for Microsoft by a bunch of people who said, hey, I know stuff, I'll throw it out there. It's a pretty powerful statement to how that can change the world. look at any open source project. I could go on about the browsers that have been created through open source. And so if you're in the technical or the development world, I'm sure you can just as easily list half a dozen open source projects off the top of your head that have significantly changed the way the world operates. So those are big picture examples of what can come of this wonderful vibe of intrinsic motivation. But let's say you don't have this altruistic excitement about what you're doing. There's been a historical model of carrots and sticks. You know, let's dangle something that you like in front of you, and then you're going to go after it, and that will get you to do the thing that you really maybe aren't as excited about. And of course, in today's world, it typically is money, or something akin to money. It might be gift cards or a vacation or something. So it's typically the first place people tend to go is money for that. And there's an interesting relationship psychologically and sociologically that humans have with money. And this may or may not be true for you as an individual, but the breadth of knowledge, the psychology studies, sociology studies prove that this is true across all societies. So is that we feel much sharper pain from losing money. So let's say $10 and I drop it on the ground and I'm going to get where I'm going and realize I don't have my $10 and I'm going to go, oh, that really stinks, and I'm going to think about that for a few hours, and I'll probably run into a friend later and say, oh, I dropped $10 on the ground today. I'm really, this is, we feel this pain, and we tend to, particularly if it's amount of money that to you is meaningful. Now, yeah, if I drop a nickel, I'm probably not going to dwell over it for hours and hours, but that's me and that's my situation. Somebody else, that nickel may be super important. So an amount that is felt by you, you will feel the pain of that loss far more than if somebody walked up and said, hey, here's $10. I'd be like, oh, that's so cool, great. I'm gonna go buy a couple beers. And that $10 kind of comes and goes, and I appreciate it, but I'm probably not going to be talking about it for days. So we have this relationship with money that, and I'm talking specifically about money today, but I'm sure you can imagine that this relationship applies to other areas of your life, where we feel loss more than we feel undying gratitude for when the same amount of money comes into our life. So that underlying psychological principle plays into a little bit of why money is not always the most effective motivator. Now, if you really want to motivate your people by threatening to take money away from them, then I probably don't want to work for you. But that would be a scare tactic. That would be an effective way. And I will tell you, there are times I've seen that used somewhat effectively. Let's say you are doing a fitness program or The Biggest Loser or something like that, where you've got 4 or 5 people in a group. So let's say there's 4 people. That group gets awarded $100 at the beginning and say, hey, this is your prize to lose. But if you don't meet your goal, then your $25 is going to get split up and go to the other team members. So they're actually going to get more money. So right there on the table is a threat at the beginning that if you don't achieve you have the money, even if it's not in your bank account, psychologically, you have this money. And if you fail to achieve your goal, then that money is not only taken away from you, but you get to see others enjoying it. So it's a little bit sadistic, a little bit Machiavellian, but there are some very specific instances where I have seen this fear of losing money used somewhat effectively. I personally still don't think I would recommend that as my first choice for motivating people in most situations. So that's just a little bit about our relationship, incentive-wise, with money. Now, intrinsic motivation is great for creativity, conducive to creativity and problem solving and complex operations. However, if you try to control that intrinsic motivation, it can be very detrimental. There's a sense that I think all of us have inherent in us that if you choose to do something on your own, there's an empowerment to it. If somebody else tells you to do that exact same thing, we have a natural resistance to that control. And that's why it gets very tricky with rewards, because intrinsic motivation is all well and good until someone tries to control that. So with my pizza example, I decided I wanted to order pizza. I'm super excited. And then somebody says, you have to have pizza for dinner tonight and you have to order it from this place down the street. Suddenly I'm like, well, maybe I don't want pizza. Maybe I want a salad because you told me I have to order pizza. So that's, taking something that I was already intrinsically motivated and excited about and turning it into a control factor for them, and then that actually takes away my excitement about it, because now it's not like my idea anymore. So that's what, even when there is intrinsic motivation, controlling it and rewarding it is a form of control that can be detrimental to it. An example, great example, I used to work in corporate wellness behavior change, and a lot of companies have an incentive program to exercise, and they will set a minimum baseline, let's say 3 times a week for 30 minutes a day. And what you'll see is twofold in poorly designed incentive programs. Is number one, people will do just that amount and then done. Maybe if I had this intrinsic motivation, I would say, hey, I did 30 minutes, I feel pretty good, I'm gonna go another 15. But they'll instead say, I did enough to get my benefit, so I'm done. Log my minutes. And typically they won't go much further. Unless people already had the exercise habit in their life, then hopefully they'll continue at the level they were already at and not bring it down. But this is getting people to form a new habit, and motivating them is typically you're getting them to that minimum level. And then it becomes almost like an addiction. If you take away the money, then they stop the behavior. So motivating people with rewards, incentives, money to try to form a long-term habit is not typically the most effective way to do that. And that, I know, sounds counter to so many companies' wellness programs and incentive programs. So, and even that activity is not one that you need a whole lot of creativity for. So if you apply that same principle to activities that require problem solving, the heuristics that I talked about earlier, problem solving, creativity and such, it's even more detrimental. And all these topics I'm going to go into more throughout the month. So I'm kind of giving you the 50,000 foot view of some of these elements, and then I'll go into some of the deeper ways they all function and work together in later episodes. So we talked about money, we talked about incentives, ongoing incentives. Goals is the last one I'll mention today in terms of the types of motivators that are more typically implemented that aren't as effective. Goals, having a goal set for you, and that might be, like I talked about, the activity, 3 days a week, 30 minutes a day. Or a lot of companies focus on quarterly earnings, and every quarter, did you hit those earnings? Another example, let's see. Well, you can probably come up with a number of your own. I'm just kind of throwing a few out there, anything that you kind of look at short term. I know I had one other one in mind, but maybe it'll come back, maybe it won't. So we'll talk about quarterly earnings and things such as trying to exercise or maybe even run a 5K, so let's actually talk about a goal like I want to run a 5K. Well, oftentimes now you're focused very short term. Goals tend to be somewhat myopic, and even if your goal is a year out, that's still short term in the grand scheme of things. So the very presence of having a goal can, not always, but it can have organizations losing sight of the long-term objective. I'm going to talk in a moment about long-term objectives that are healthier, but one of those is mastery. So let's say I wanted to become great at running. Well, having a goal of a 5K is not, like I said, not a bad thing, but it's very tricky in that you might get to that 5K and go, hey, I did it. All right, pat myself on the back, mission accomplished. Now I'll just run another 5K or just go running every day. And you kind of tend to typically lose that momentum, lose that long-term if your long-term goal is mastery, then having these short-term goals can actually take you away from, okay, what is next then? What do I do to improve further? And so this is where the quarterly earnings focus is fascinating to me, because there was numerous studies done, that companies who focus on their quarterly earnings have lower long-term growth rates than companies that offer less guidance in the short term. And there's a variety of complex reasons for this, but two of them that jump out is that oftentimes those companies will invest less in research and development, because that's typically a much longer time frame return on your investment, and you're not going to see that short-term quarterly earnings goal met if you're putting out there. But the overall growth of the company in the 5 to 10 year range becomes so much healthier and more successful if those quarterly earnings goals aren't the myopic focus of people, especially as those dates come up. There tends to be ways that they even might be artificially inflated for the report or taken out of context in some way. So these goals can also, especially if they're externally measured goals and not just your own intrinsic motivational goals, can also lead to cheating, to misrepresenting, because the goal is what becomes so important, as opposed to the mastery of the health and the mastery of the actual bigger picture. There's a quote that I love, and I don't even know who said it, so maybe I'll look it up and put it in the comments, but it's always stuck with me, is that greatness and nearsightedness are not compatible. And I just, that always, I have to remind myself of that once in a while when I get too caught up in the moment and the details, that true greatness is not compatible with nearsightedness. That being said, I'm going to quickly shift, and I've already gone on longer today than I had intended, and I look forward to diving deeper into the future, into these topics. I will leave you with this: the true elements of genuine motivation, and this is where you really get to that high level of flow when you're in that state, when you're being creative, and great companies to work for, and great cultures, and you really feel like you have achieved something in your life, come from looking at achieving mastery. And that in and of itself is practically unattainable, because you look at some of even the greatest sports figures out there, and no matter how good they are, you can never really say, yeah, you have mastered tennis or hockey or cycling. There's always something more to be working on. So mastery is a very noble, big picture, long-term goal. Purpose, feeling like you're part of something bigger. This harkens back a little bit to that Wikipedia story. And autonomy. Do you feel like you are personally responsible for the outcome and the achievement? So those are three things that really play into people performing at the highest level. Another comment on when cash money rewards do work is when it is an algorithmic task that a person has to do. So back to my comment at the beginning, I had friends who were stuck for 5 days stuffing envelopes. Fold the paper, put it in the envelope, close the envelope, put the address on, send it out. Not the most mentally engaging, creative task. There's basically one way to do it. I mean, you can create little games for yourself and maybe make it slightly more interesting, but there's really no way that you're going to turn that into, an origami project. So that's a situation where the company could choose to incentivize financially. So whether that's saying you get 5 cents for every envelope you stuff, and that motivates you to do more, or hey, if we hit this by 5 o'clock today, we've got all these done as a team, you'll all get $150, whatever. That is an appropriate situation where it makes sense to motivate people with a carrot dangling in front of them ahead of time. And that hopefully is not their job that they're going to be doing week after week. This would be like a one-time, we need to get this done, and you'll be rewarded. So that is one of the few instances, and you can probably think of your own kind of correlation to that type of need. I will talk more about great rewards that do work, that do inspire creativity, that do inspire the type of higher level thinking and behavior and teamwork that you want to see in yourself and in your work and in your teams that you're on next week. Signing off, why carrot and stick motivators are not effective. They can extinguish intrinsic motivation. They can diminish performance. They can crush creativity. They can actually crowd out good behavior. So you're, encouraging cheating and shortcuts and unethical behavior just to meet sort of an artificial short-term goal. They can become addictive. I expect to get paid every time I exercise or else I'm not going to do it anymore. And they can really foster short-term thinking, which is not necessarily what you want in the big picture. That's it for today. Thank you so much for joining me. I will put a link to my Calendly in the comments. So if you want to chat with me about anything, if you want to talk about anything that you're looking to get out of life, I do various types of consulting and coaching and public speaking. So if you're interested in having me speak on any of these types of topics at an organization or event that you may know of, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Have a great rest of your week and weekend, and be kind to each other because everyone is fighting their own battles out there. Take care. I'll see you next week.